So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming in today's call. It's a Reltio community show, and it's a Ask Me Anything. And the topic of today is how AI is influencing the future of master data management. So the slides that we show today is just what I show. And so we are not going to have slides today, and we're not going to go in depth about anything specific besides picking the brain of our expert around AI and ML, Michael Burke. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. I'm doing well. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you all for joining today. It's exciting to be on and Ask Me Anything. I think this is my first one, Chris. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, we did one on data quality a little over a year ago.
So. That's right. We did one a year ago, but really excited to be here. And thank you guys all for attending today. Appreciate it.
So just as a reminder, keep yourself on mute. All questions, feel free to ask in chat, or you can take your self off of mute and ask the questions. So this will be recorded as usual and posted to the community. So we have a ton of events coming up here in the next 2 months. So I won't go into all of them, but we do have today's show, which is June 8th. And then we have several other shows. So if you have not had a chance to RSVP, please do. Michael is coming back on July 27th to go deep into one of the features that have just coming out called leveraging on the 27th of July, leveraging pre-trained machine learning models for efficient entity resolution. So that's coming, but that's not specific to today. Super exciting stuff. And then lastly, Reltio is sponsoring in a big way an event called Data Driven 23. It's a catalyst for business acceleration is the theme. It's an industry event with Reltio as the main sponsor. Goal is to connect with your peers, learn from industry leading speakers. Go sign up. Here are all the keynotes, featured speakers, and session speakers. I did think this slide looked a little bit better than what it does, but that's okay. I'm not a slide guru, but that's all of the stuff right now. But why don't we go ahead and get into, let me take this guy off video and let's get into the questions, Michael. You ready? And by the way,
absolutely.
I have questions I'm gonna, go ahead, Mike.
Chris, really quickly on the data driven, I saw DJ was up there. If you guys haven't seen DJ speak, you should definitely try to go to this event if you can. He was at one point leading all of AI and ML for the United States. So, incredibly talented leader, individual, and an amazing speaker if you have the opportunity to go. I'm assuming if you're interested in this call, probably interested in AI, he's just great. So I've been on a couple of his talks before. I've listened to him, really enjoyed what he had to say, and I always learn something. So
cool. And just as a rules of engagement, again, this is Ask Me Anything, so feel free to ask questions that aren't being asked. But I have some kickoff questions, and I'm going to start with the first one. You ready, Michael? Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it.
Can you talk a little bit about the current state of master data management and where you think it's going when it comes to AI technologies? And then can you explain a little bit about how AI is revolutionizing the MDM space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's really kind of three areas when we think about, MDM in general. Where can machine learning and AI be applied, right? It's internally, how can we make our internal efficiencies and product run smoother, better monitoring of services, scaling of cloud resources. There's customer facing, which I'll go into in a little bit. What features can we create? And then there's this idea of enabling or helping integrate. How can we provide access and controls to other services or to enable data scientists and make the whole process of enabling AI better, easier, and more efficient? When we talk about customer-facing features, I think there's really three main areas where AI is really playing a pivotal role in revolutionizing MDM. The first is data quality and data cleansing, right? Detecting bad data and providing better, more automated means of communication. There's matching and duplication, deduplication, right? Consolidating data into a single source of truth. And then there's governance and compliance, right? Automatically detecting and classifying sensitive data, reviewing and automating who has access to what. There is a lot of new technology exploding into this space. But ultimately, right, all of these technologies roll back to kind of the same underlying principles of what they're trying to do. They're trying to reduce the amount of management and manual effort it takes to create a clean and consolidated single source of truth. They help speed things up, improve accuracy, and improve reliability.
Good. And you mentioned data quality. How does, AI enhance the quality of data within master data management systems?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at some of the data quality tools out there right now, including some of the things that we're working on internally, right? You're talking about anomaly detection, right? Previously, data stewards have had to go through, sort, analyze the quality of these source systems as data is flowing in. When things change in schemas or structure, they have to automatically update or manually update those changes and be in constant communication with both their upstream and downstream stakeholders. I think that a huge advantage and where you see AI really taking off is being able to automatically detect those anomalies, right? Send the proper stakeholders notifications, and then track and manage if change has been implemented, and being able to evaluate that whole process over time, right?
So earlier you mentioned data governance and compliance. What are some ways that AI is helping, companies achieve, more accurate and efficient data governance?
Yeah, so I think that when you think about data governance, right, there's two areas. There's governing the data, right? And so that's things like removing or controlling who has access to PII, removing or obfuscating PII, creating synthetic data, giving users at all levels of the business the opportunity to consume data in different ways, depending on their use cases to maximize value. And then you have governance of actually using the systems, who has access to what, should they have access to what they have access to, and kind of evaluating that from more of a control perspective. I think that those are the two biggest areas in data governance that you're seeing change. The final one, which is in some ways part of data governance, is this idea that you hear a lot with metadata analysis and looking at how data changes throughout multiple systems. I think these governing platforms that you're seeing come out now, leveraging AI to understand what are the common platforms or processes that users are consuming data, and how is it getting from point A to point Z in that ecosystem.
So when you think of how AI technologies like machine learning, natural language processing, and predictive analytics, how are those being utilized in MDM?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about natural language processing and predictive analytics, there's a lot going on right now, especially with large language models. I've talked at 3 conferences in the past couple months, and each one has been completely booked on this topic. Everybody now is coming and saying, what is our AI strategy? Every CDO that I've talked to has gone to their board or is planning to go to their board shortly to ask for more resources in this space. Um, when we talk about large language models or NLP in master data management, I think there's some really powerful places that it can be applied. When you talk about text to anything, as an example, can we reduce the complexity of being able to leverage, search, and utilize data within an MDM platform? Integrations is another one, right, as a customer-facing feature, helping build better, cleaner customizations and integrations with AI. But then there's also more fundamental use cases of NLP. A great example is with machine learning. It is really difficult for data stewards to be able to have the same kind of accountability and transparency that they've seen with rules and rule-based systems, where you can say, look, these data matched because these two rules fired off and were accurate, and that's the logic I have to share with you. With a model, it can be a little bit more different when we talk about feature importance scores and kind of these other variables. So one of the areas that we see NLP as a real kind of game changer is looking at explainability, right? How can a machine learning model, or large language model help better explain why matching in two met records belong together? And so really, when you start thinking about these technologies at scale, areas like this, where you're starting to see more large language models come into play, really are starting to drive bigger and bigger differences in how we can automate things. You're seeing so much more in the support area, right? Filing support tickets, looking through documentation. These are all areas where you're definitely going to see a lot more application of large language models, not just in the MDM space, but across the board.
How does AI facilitate data deduplication and error detection and master data management?
Yeah, so we talked about anomaly detection already, right? Analyzing patterns and trends of statistical data and deviations from expected behavior, right? I think that there's also this idea of error correction, right? If you have trained machine learning models with context, right, they have an ability to identify and predict where there are errors in your data, such as like misspellings or missing values, and actually go through and correct those in some use cases. And then I think the third area is really around data enrichment, right? When you talk about NLP or using external data integrations, can machine learning help automate that process, making it faster, better, cleaner, and more accurate?
Great, and we're getting some questions. So let's go to the audience, Michael, because I do have 4 other questions that I could ask. But Sri, thanks for asking your question. And his question is, can you help us understand if AI is help resolving multiple OV values? So even after going through match merge, fallback strategies. So for example, here's a use case, location. For example, address line 1 has data in uppercase and mixed case for same source. So the data content is the same. Can Reltio AI help to identify such issues and fix the pattern that most of the records using, for example, mixed use case for this? So currently we're having, issues such as event occurs in Reltio and resulting in 2 OV values. We don't want to update as uppercase. I don't know, did you get that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really a cleansing problem, right? It's how can we transform our data so it's all in the same format? So when we do comparisons, they aren't drastically different, right? And we don't end up with 2 OV values. I think that there is a ton of ways that we could do that. I don't believe you really even need AI, right? So that's definitely something that we can walk through and something that Reltio can help with. But to give a better example of where AI comes into place and some of the areas that we are actively thinking about is what if you have data in multiple languages, right? Or more complicated, what if you have data in multiple character sets? How then are you going to do entity resolution with traditional technologies? It becomes a lot more complicated. So a great application of AI is for translation or transcoding of that information to, in the same way that you're talking about uppercase and lowercase, standardize or cleanse this information so that it can be matched more effectively.
Great. And then here's some other questions from the audience. Keith asks, what classes of ML models do you see us using for matching? So example could be linear regression or NLP.
Yeah, great question. I think that NLP, we have explored some matching with NLP and large language models. There is opportunity for those use cases, but one of the trade-offs that we are constantly having is around the difference between speed, accuracy, and performance, right? And NLP models and these more robust, heavier models take a lot of processing power. And if you're trying to get maximum throughput on your services and process this data in real time, we could be adding latency. So some of the areas that we're exploring right now, and a lot of this is in early access. And Keith, I don't know if you are a current customer, but if you are, we would love to partner with you on this, is where are those trade-offs? And is there really one model that fits all use cases? Or do we want to create separate variants of models to solve specific use cases within entity resolution? Linear regression could be used in some use cases, but most of the time with a lot of the data we're looking at, we're using classification models.
How can AI help Reltio MDM to implement better publish processes?
That's a great question. I think that as we start to, and I've actually talked to a couple other folks at separate companies about this, there is so much intricacy in how we set up and deploy processes for customers, right? And one of the areas where AI will really help to benefit our customers and create more standardized published processes is around something like with the velocity packs that we've released, right? Where there is a standard set of outcomes and defined expectations provided up front. And we're trying to understand how to make that process even better. That's one of the areas where we would definitely consider applying AI and ML, help understand those processes, and maybe even create better recipes and integrations in the future.
Yeah, and this is comment, and if you have some thoughts around it, I'd love to hear it. But your example with many languages can be resolved without AI, just translation and comparison of like Chinese with Chinese.
It could. You're right. There are other alternatives to that. I think it gets more complicated when you start talking about, and again, these questions, it's like the simplest form of them, absolutely. Like most use cases do not need AI or ML to solve at the very fundamental level. But what if you're talking about nicknames between different languages, right? And the layers of abstraction become more complicated, right? Different weights of different attributes, looking at them holistically across different character sets. Well, it becomes a more challenging problem. And ultimately, our goal with implementing AI and ML is to simplify that process and make it so that a user in a data store doesn't have to worry about as much of that configuration.
Yeah, and he mentions that, we have so many issues with like simple organizations names. So for example, Graybar, Gray bar versus Graybar, Grey bar, or TIPCO,
Yeah.
TIPCO versus TIPCO Software France. So he said ML could potentially help with that.
And look, like I'm the first person to tell you, even though I lead AI and ML here, that it's just a tool, right? It's not a solution for everything. And there are always going to be use cases where AI is not necessary. A great example is if you're looking at like matching two source systems that have unique IDs. We're never going to train a machine learning model to solve that problem. That is a rule-based system, if anything, if there's logic with how those IDs were created. So where AI really comes in is when the number of layers or complexity to the data sets that you're trying to merge exceeds that of a simple rule. When you've got 100 different attributes or even a dozen different attributes that all matter in different use cases and different scenarios to decide whether a match is valid or not, that's where machine learning can come in and help with classifying this data and weighting and creating extra features to break down that information into more meaningful parts.
Lots of good questions coming in. So I'm going to keep reading them, Michael.
Yeah, go for it.
Can we have an example on how anomaly detection would be useful for Reltio MDM?
Oh, absolutely. So what we're actually doing right now, and we'll be out in early access, is creating anomaly detection on data quality metrics, right? So think about fill rate, right? You've got fill rate of different attributes, hundreds of attributes coming in from dozens of different sources, right? It's very hard for you to find that needle in the haystack when something changes, especially if it's not a critical attribute that you're using in your resolution processes, right? So what happens today typically is that this data continues to run with problems, and eventually a downstream stakeholder who's consuming this data to create some sort of business value gets upset and files a complaint. And hopefully it's not a critical complaint or something that takes down a system, but that happens. Where anomaly detection really comes in is being able to detect those issues the moment they occur, right? As soon as maybe a source system attribute goes down and stops being populated, we identify that change over time in the fill rate and send you an alert, right? And even beyond that, some of the things that we're thinking about is, well, is sending you an alert really the last place that we have to stop? Are there other ways that we could even recommend improving your fill rates by providing third-party enrichment services or recommendations to other tools or feature generation that we could help to improve the quality of your data and ultimately improve that experience for your customers?
Good stuff. And I know Mark has been excited. He's going to be excited to hear about this, but what are some of the key enhancements planned for Match IQ? And I'm excited to hear what you say about this, especially around review and getting that input into the model.
That is great. So our long-term goal is to be able to automatically learn and make our pre-trained models smarter over time based off of data stored action, right? And the idea with that is, can we create localized models that get smarter for your specific use cases over time? And so the way we're trying to do that, and some of the things that we're looking to improve in that experience, are things like bulk edit, right? If we're creating a model that's going to create a lot of recommended matches for you, your data stored team has to go through and evaluate those matches until they're at a point where they trust them and they can say, okay, I want to automate this. I'm fine with having auto merge turned on for, records that are above this certain threshold. But in order to do that, in order to make your lives easier, we have to come up with faster and better ways to label that data and to get it into the system and clean it and evaluate it quicker. And today that process is good. I think we can make it a lot better.
Yeah, and the questions keep rolling in. I told you, Michael, they would. So
I love this. This is like, if anybody wants to go on audio too, please jump in.
Yeah. How is AI taking Google BigQuery? How AI is taking Google BigQuery into consideration in MDM? How are we thinking about that?
How is AI taking Google BigQuery into consideration with MDM? Who said that comment? I'd love to hear a little bit more about what they're.
Utsa, did you want to take yourself off mute?
Hey, yeah. So actually, what I'm trying to know that, when we are, so there is I think, new version is coming where Reltio is taking some Google BigQuery, which helps into the publish process, right?
Yeah.
So let's say it is going to the same thing that when Google BigQuery is done its stuff, it is going creates its result, some extracts. So it will go through the publish process. So it can impact some defectful data or something like that, right? So how AI can detect it? Because obviously we cannot trust that Google BigQuery in result fruitful enough. So I'm just thinking that if it is comes into the consideration, so maybe AI can integrate with Google BigQuery to make something fruitful into the end result, which we can obviously use in many perspectives. Right, one of the things is publish, right?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, look, if you look at Google BigQuery, first of all, they have some really amazing AI technologies that are already out and some that are coming out shortly. But Reltio is a two-way street into Google BigQuery. We can pull data in from Google BigQuery and perform our analysis and provide value that way. And we can also export data into Google BigQuery. So, when we talk about how can AI improve the data in Google BigQuery, it can be done either way, right? And if there are use cases where you say, look, we want to leverage pre-trained machine learning models in Reltio, no problem. We can connect in to Google BigQuery, pull that data in, do that consolidation if there's other source systems or cleanse, and then put it right back into Google BigQuery. So I think that, that's one of the beautiful things about Reltio as a product is it's completely agnostic as to what it needs to connect into and what it can send data out to.
Balaji, welcome. So will AI recommend what should be the future state survivorship and match rules based on current auto match and potential match queue stats?
So I think that we're thinking about things a little bit differently. First of all, survivorship is a whole nother can of worms that we're just stepping into right now, right? So in full transparency, there is a lot more there. It is really industry and use case specific in some circumstances. But what I will say is that, our goal with pre-trained models and what we're working on right now is to take away all of that context of you needing to train and do a lot of manual labeling up front, right? We've got some great partners. We're working with a lot of really powerful data sets to build these use cases out that just work out of the box, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about, well, how will those models get smarter over time? Yes, like in previous features that we've released, you've had to go off and train them, right? You've had to take manual action to make those models smarter. our goal and our vision is to be invisible as we get smarter, right? You should not have any different experience when you're a data steward going in and reviewing and matching records and making changes. You shouldn't have to do anything else. That's your focus. That's your job. What happens behind the scenes and what we're working towards happening behind the scenes is a localized model. We'll start to get smarter and answer questions better for your specific use cases. And it's learning based off of the feedback that your data stewards are providing by taking action.
Thanks, Michael. What's a sample trained data set and accuracy of a model? What's a sample trained? Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I think we'll probably need a little elaboration on that.
Siddhartha?
Yes, so this is a model, correct? NLP model, and any kind of model when we are creating, so we provide some data to train that model, and we evaluate the accuracy of that model as well, correct? So
Correct.
we just want to know the architecture behind it, like what kind of architecture it is going for, or if not architecture, then what are the data where it is trained, so that what kind of output we can expect from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of two views that we're working towards right now. A globalized model, and that essentially is trained off of data that we've collected and that we've partnered with others for to make these generalized models smarter out of the box. So if you're a net new customer coming in, we have a starting point that's a heck of a lot further along down the road than ground zero. And then there's this idea of localized models. And those localized models are going to be trained on you as a customer's data and the feedback that you provide as a data steward, right? So that's why it will get smarter for your specific use cases. And now one of the areas that we're thinking about is, well, would it work better for you to start with a globalized model and then ultimately make that model smarter in a localized setting? That's where we're still some of the things that we're working through right now as a team. And again, we're early in this stage, but we've provided a lot of value so far, and the results, which we're going to share later in a deep dive. So if we want to go into the architecture, I know there's a lot of questions there. The meeting will be in July that we'll walk into that, and we'll bring on probably some of the engineering team as well, possibly, to dive into that. But it is a really powerful architecture that we've created that respects customers' privacy, and it allows you to input information into a localized model that is designed specifically for you. That's what we're working towards.
Okay, so it will get trained on the company's model itself, correct?
Correct.
So, so there will be a labeling, or you can say classification, where it will get trained.
Yes.
So based on it will be customized as well, if my understanding is correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this kind of go back to Match IQ that Mark asked. He goes, so it's a statement, I think, but I don't know if you have maybe some thoughts around it. But with Match IQ, what are the implications of basing on a larger number of attributes? Seems like different max allowed values in different tenants. Maybe it was a question, actually.
So I think what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, is that how can you train a model on like n number of values? Like, is there a maximum size or requirements to start out? What we're doing is we're picking for specific industries. We have a pretty good understanding of how to answer these questions based off of a fixed number of attributes. And so what we're working on is saying, hey, we can take any number of attributes into the model, but here's the minimum required number of attributes that we're going to need in order to run this model effectively.
Yeah, we're hi, this is Mark speaking. We're kind of running, I guess, some POCs on the Match IQ, and so obviously it's nothing with a starter kit. It's just kind of creating it from scratch, and we're seeing the number of attributes that you're allowed to use. The maximum number seems to vary from tenant to tenant, and I'm sure that's configurable, though we're trying to get that changed. But the question is, what's the implications of using more or less? Like, in other words, is it by using fewer, are you going to kind of get to a better point quicker, but it's going to not necessarily mature enough? Like, I'm trying to kind of figure out the trade-offs of what to be using with that.
That's a great question. I would say that is totally dependent on so many factors, right? And I can break down a few of them right now, like the quality of your data, right? If we're assuming that the quality is perfect, you may not need as many attributes because you have really high quality data that you can go against with trust and say, there's these specific attributes which I know are good across your organization. It's like anything else, right? And I hate to use this term, but the garbage in, garbage out. If you have poor quality data, even with a machine learning model, it might be able to give you a little lift, but that's going to be relative to the quality of your information in your source systems. If you have high quality data, and it's also the complexity of what you're trying to match too, right? If this is a standard, customer organization, there are attributes that we know have pretty good output, right, and can give you, relatively good results by selecting those fixed number of attributes. But if you have some sort of custom entity, right, it may take more, right? Especially if the attributes don't have any real signal to them. So again, this is a process, and Mark, if you're working through this, I'm happy to jump on a follow-up with you. We can sync in and kind of go through that for your specific use case.
That would be phenomenal.
But yeah, as data scientists, I mean, this is like the challenge that always persists, right? Especially with complicated data sets, is what is the signal that's important, that's going to create that important match? And we can go through that later.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Wayne asks, can ML or AI help to identify invalid source records? So for example, test records sent to production or incomplete records.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great use case. We've talked about this with the fat fingering, right? Or in our data quality dashboard, you can see this if you look at frequency analysis. We've gone through customers where, the classic one is somebody at a POS system is just entering like AAA or 123 as a name, and you'll see 10,000 of those right in your data source. The same thing holds true for test data. I think that's a data quality area where we could definitely invest more in classifying that information and calling out those anomalies. But one thing I will say is that a lot of that test data has a pattern to it typically, and isn't being generated with like synthetic data where it's supposed to look like normal data. So it is pretty easy to find in a lot of use cases by just going to the data quality dashboard and looking at those attributes in the frequency analysis. We've seen really good results with that so far.
Data observability, and especially looking for slowly changing trends based on ML, is huge and is growing right now. Will Reltio be baking this behavior into the platform?
That's a great question. I mean, we're actively exploring a lot of avenues right now. Again, how far we go down one specific vertical and what we build versus partner, I think is a question that we're still looking to explore there.
Do you plan to use AI in relevance-based match?
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something that we're working towards right now. We're actively engaged in it. And we're going to share a lot more of that come July.
Looking forward to that one. Are you considering, and this is a third party, but are you also considering to use AI in locate?
Hey, Chris, I'm sorry. This is Gino. I just want to go back to that last question for a second.
Yeah.
If you're using AI in the relevance-based match, is it still relevance-based match?
It's a good question, Gino. I mean, I think that what we're trying to do is understand how much context we want to bring to matching, right? And so I think that it is kind of like an area where I'm not going to get too hung up on the terminology, but it is a good question.
Yeah,
there
okay.
are
We don't have to dive into it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, it's a great question. I think that the big piece that we're trying to figure out right now is how much of this can we do out of the box? How much of this really requires context when we want to match? And what are the performance implications and other implications that will come up as we increase the complexity of these models? And without getting into the numbers, because again, we're holding that till July, but we're seeing really good preliminary results with what we've built so far for these specific use cases. And like anything else, machine learning is not going to work for every scenario. rules will not work for every scenario. They both have their unique use cases. And so I think that as we step into this together, especially with a lot of these customers that have signed up for early access, we're going to see and validate where we really succeed and thrive.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Gino. No,
No
you're
problem.
fine. Don't be sorry. Are we considering using AI in locate?
So I don't fully understand that question as far as what your, if whoever wrote that question wouldn't mind jumping in and elaborating a little bit.
Anto?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, well, I'm thinking about mostly locations in India to help with geolocalize these locations using AI, because it's very hard to have accurate results.
That's a great question. I think that there is probably a balance there of how much do we want to become an address validation company, right? That's a huge area of work. But I do think that there's opportunities for us to do some standardized cleansing to make that process better. We are not actively engaged in that right now, but I think that if that is something that is a pain point, we should discuss it. And I'd be happy to set up a follow-up call to learn more about your use case.
And I also think that this is an opportunity, especially with all these questions around AI and ML, is to go to AHA, push those ideas there so that we can kind of keep up with them, right? And so we know what might be helpful and things like that.
Great
what
point.
learning,
Yeah.
and Mark has another question about what learnings from Reltio trained model activities would be helpful to customers that don't benefit from like a specific industry?
That's a good question. So again, without sounding too vague on this, it really depends on the specific use case and the data, right? It's kind of a one to many, right? If you're talking about, data about a satellite in space, it's going to vary from, home in the United States. So I think that it really is, the most important thing is to understand, and a lot of this you can use intuition to start, right? Evaluating your data sets and understanding what are the features that you would match these records on manually, and using that intuition as a stepping stone to kind of start to measure what should be prioritized. It really, beyond that, it's going to be a specific use case, but you can look at things like uniqueness, frequency of the data. If you put it into the data quality tool, you can start to evaluate some of that. To be able to understand, are there specific attributes that we do think would have more signal, right? A great example of that too is, like, for example, a attribute that's very sparsely filled, right? The fill rate is very low. It may have very little meaning for all of the records, but for those records that do have that data set, maybe it's a social security number as an example, if there's a match, that then becomes a very strong indicator that those records should belong together, right? So that's a good example of how it depends on the data set, and it depends on the quality of the data within that data set.
Right. I wasn't so much looking for a specific attribute, just as you're doing things, I'm figuring you're getting input, or you're finding something, and then you go, no, because of this, we're going to go a certain way. So if something could kind of be laid out that, and you're doing it for specific sets, but I'm sure when you're doing one industry and you go into the next, you're benefiting from what you've learned from the first one, just as people. So if that was available to a customer, so we could kind of figure things out that way, it would be helpful.
That's a great point. And I think that we should think about that one, because I think that, to your point, if you are in a unique data space where there isn't a lot of guidance, it might be really difficult to come to those conclusions on your own.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, look, as a first step, let's just have a follow-up and discuss it. And I'm sure that we can get to at least step one just by going through and understanding your intuition on the data, and what do you think are the best judgment calls that we should start to explore, and we can dive in from there.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I asked you to schedule something offline. Okay, thank you.
Awesome, will do. Does the architecture change regarding enrichment and predictive modeling? So the current thought is like push low latency from Reltio to Snowflake, Snowpark, or Databricks, like a lakehouse. And so, for example, get both a customer 360 and start getting recommendations like an upsell, et cetera, and also enrichment?
I love this question.
I do too.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah. There.
So look, I think that the way that we're thinking about machine learning in general across the product today, especially for entity relationships and entity resolution, which is what we're focused on, is an internally managed product, right? There will be the opportunity, and we've had some customer feedback of, hey, for those customers that are really advanced, we may have machine learning models we want to try out within your system. But for most customers, this is going to be a managed feature within Reltio. I think what you're talking about is, what about if I want to integrate into a third-party tool where I can do machine learning? And that is something that we also support through our connectors. So Databricks is one of them, Snowflake. There are these environments where if you're a data scientist, you can take advantage of this information and do a heck of a lot more with it outside of the platform.
Great. A couple more questions, it looks like. So if we have a global versus local ML models, what ML ops framework is there to manage operating in challenger models across domains?
Great question. I don't know who that was, but we should talk later because it sounds like you have a strong background in data science.
I know, I thought the same thing.
We should talk about it. There are some areas that we're exploring there. Again, this is stuff that's coming in the future, and we probably need to show that screen that we show at the beginning of our presentations that this is future work and it is subject to change. But there are some approaches that we're exploring on how to do that transfer essentially between models and also between localized and global models.
You and I have talked a little bit about that, Michael, in the past. Interesting. Do you train your models using third-party, like public data by industry vertical? Would love to understand better from LS, like clinical data perspective.
Yeah, so we're using third-party data sources. We have some partners that have offered up, very generously some of their information as a sample for us to validate against in real scenarios. And we're open to other partnerships, right? What we're doing is, and we also create synthetic data. So that's another area that we've explored as well. There is no silver bullet here, right? Even in real life examples, labels are wrong, rules are wrong. So, in many ways, we are navigating an area of challenge, right? We have a lot of information from a lot of really trusted third-party data sources that people pay money for, and even those data sources have inconsistencies and inaccuracies. But one of the ways that we can remediate a lot of this, and the reason that our next step is really working on this platform to be able to create labels faster, is by understanding how we can create localized models that learn from you guys as domain experts on your specific business use cases.
Sounds like you're going to have a lot of calls. So Kurt asks, deduplication is just one aspect of the overall data quality problem. And I think it's a mistake to focus solely on using AI for match improvement. He's very blunt. To me, the larger question is, how will Reltio leverage AI to help me manage my data as a product and maintain high quality data in all manners that are important to my customers? So, my consuming community, i.e. my consuming community.
So look, I'll jump back to it again. I'm a strong believer that can AI get you a lot further along in your data journey? Yes, right. Especially if you don't have a lot of domain experts on your payroll that can help with those, providing that guidance. Is there a really strong use case for rules? Yeah, there is too, and they're never going away. And I would never say in a blanket statement that we want to replace or remove one versus the other, because they both have their place. They're both valuable. And even in the data science space, when we're building models, my previous careers outside of machine learning, there's always a good use case for a rule, right? They're fast, they're reliable, and they're simple. And why use a statistic, a probabilistic statistic, when you know the answer can fit to a rule in certain circumstances? So, how can AI help me manage data as a product, right? It's providing that simplicity It's reducing that time to value. And it's removing the need to have as much upfront expertise when you're first starting out and investing in a data journey. I think that if you're, a decade into this, sure, there will be some efficiencies that we can find and some simplification, but you're already an expert, right? You've already invested the time. But for a lot of companies that we see coming to us with these challenges, they don't know where to start and they don't have the right experts on their team. This is really where machine learning can help.
And I don't see any other questions from the audience, but I want to kind of go back to a couple of other questions that I think we didn't touch on, but that I think are important. Can you discuss the potential security risks and risks associated with the use of AI in MDM and how these risks can be mitigated?
Yeah, so I mean, look, there's a lot of things going on in the machine learning space, and the one that's been coming to top of mind is with generative AI, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
People are putting huge amounts of data into a third-party service that's doing machine learning, but it's collecting that data and it's processing it, right? And to me, these go back to the basics, right? You are a data steward. You're responsible for protecting the integrity and the security of this information. And now all of a sudden there are these tools that people are just probably in a lot of cases unknowingly sending sensitive information to where it's not governed, right? And it's out of your control and it's now being held by a third party. And regardless of what those third parties have set up for contracts and policies, that's a whole area of risk that I think a lot of people aren't fully aware of, especially when we're doing things like copying emails into these processes, right? Or copying sensitive articles to get improved. But even generic prompts, right? How much could a company like ChatGPT learn about your business from what you've put into it today? I think that's a huge risk and something that I know some companies have tried to create controls around this, but it's really an uncontrolled problem to date. And it's why you're seeing a lot more regulation from organizations like the EU. I don't know if anyone has seen this already, but they proposed a bill where essentially if you release an open source large language model and somebody else uses it for commercial gain, you as the person who released that open source code can now be held, or if this goes through, will be held liable or could be held liable for any damages. So some really interesting things going on to try to create better controls on these models. But just like the internet, it's kind of a Wild West moment. And I think that it's taking a while for regulation and policy to catch up.
Completely agree. And one more question, and I'll be done with my questions, but can you share some successful case studies where AI has significantly improved MDM processes? And that's my last one.
So there's a couple. I think the biggest one that we're working on right now is this idea of, and we'll dive into this more in July, right? But the biggest one is this idea of in the, HCO, HCP space, how we're able to pre-train a model to do entity resolution, which is accurate and fast. We've had incredible results on this so far with preliminary testing, and we really do believe that in this specific industry, for this specific use case, it is perfect for machine learning, right? We've got data sources that are commonly used across almost every customer, and they're using the same data to get to relatively similar results and outputs. So I think that when you think about where could machine learning really thrive and help provide the best practices for a situation like this, this HCO, HCP is one area that we're seeing in the life sciences space where we can do a lot.
Great. I don't see any other questions. Just in case there is, I want to thank everybody for coming to this Ask Me Anything. Michael, this has been really great. I knew that we'd get a bunch of questions like this, and hopefully it's helpful. We're all learning as we go as well, and Reltio is certainly investing in this area, and you'll see that here shortly. On a show that we're going to do on the ML and entity resolution in late July. But keep the questions coming. Go to community.reltio.com, ask questions there, communicate with your peers. Michael will also be answering questions there. This show is going to be recorded and posted to the community as well. I'll be sending out a follow-up here in the next week or so, or in the next few days. And lastly, please take the survey at the end. We want to make sure that that we get feedback. We know that your feedback is obviously very important, so make sure you do that. And in the meantime, I'll see you guys next week if you want to come to the next show. But Michael, thank you so much.